Welcome to our Cattleman U podcast segment, where we dedicated a whole episode to answering your questions. Have you ever wanted to sit down and pick Karoline's brain? In this segment, we do just that. We're answering your questions on topics from starting your own business to how to manage your day-to-day. You've asked, and we have the answers. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the Cattleman U podcast. I'm your host, Karoline Rose-Bohannan, and today I have Jordyn here with me to go over a bunch of questions and answers.
Yeah, so this kind of episode is going to be our Q&A episodes from you, the listeners, and your followers on social media. Each episode, we're going to start with a little recap of our month and then the questions that we've received throughout the month. So, without further ado, for October, we drove 5,634 miles. We sat in roughly 11 sale barns, shipped 8 truckloads of cattle in the country, had 1 week of ranch camp, completed 2 meat pickups for the rancher's daughter, and oversaw 2 customer sales. That was a crazy month, and we're excited to kind of debrief about what happened this month and how it went. So first, tell us a little bit about your favorite parts of the month.
Lots of driving. I think this time of year leads to a lot of driving, and I love to drive, so I'm not complaining at all. My sale barn route has changed a little bit, and so I used to stay in central Montana, but this year I've been going into Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, so I've been able to experience new barns and kind of different cattle, and so that's been really fun, but it does lead to several days on the road. When they have big weeks down there, I'll be in Idaho kind of as my home base for 4 days in a row, and so lots of miles, lots of new cattle. So that always is my favorite part about this season is lots of shipping cattle. It's really interesting because we didn't really ship that many cattle in October as we normally do. We bought more in the country. We shipped a lot of cattle in September, and a lot of cattle in August, and we kind of got some of those calves shipped early, and then October was really a sale barn month. We already will be shipping more cattle in November in the country than we did in October. And so we were able to get some really good calves down the road, which is always good. They weighed up well. The customer was happy, and it was new buyers. So we loved that. We had 2 customer fall sales. So one was in Texas. We had 3. One was in Texas and one was in Florida. And then we had a private treaty sale in the middle for one of our customers. And so that's always fun, especially when we have customers who are kind of across the US from us. Both had exceptional sales, are very happy with how it went. I think that gives a lot of hope and optimism to what we see in the cattle industry. November leads to a lot of miles, a lot more sales. Lots of customer sales are just kind of starting. And so we're going to see a lot of sales in December and January. And then the last thing, of course, in October was ranch camp. And it was beautiful. We had the nicest weather, which we were really worried about.
Best of all the ranch camps.
Yeah, because every other ranch camp it significantly rained. With getting cattle in from the sale barn, we are able to see different things at this ranch camp. And so I think that allows a little bit of those calves that are new to our lot to be processed. We tried some new processing methods that we are doing just for the backgrounding lot in general. And also one of the really exciting things is the ranch got a new chute. So we haven't been able to use it yet for ranch camp. It was like the week after ranch camp. But the controls are down here, so none of us will be ruining our shoulders anymore. If you see any ranch camp videos, everyone has their hands above their head. So the controls are down here. And also I heard it's really, really quiet, which is good because that is one of the hardest parts when teaching in there is it is loud. And so it does make a lot of noise. And so it will be nice to have it quiet. So we're really excited about that ranch upgrade. And it's just really cool to we have a family list of goals and things that we want to invest and kind of accomplish. And as we make progress on those, that's just really exciting for my brother and my dad and all of that.
Yeah, I had the lucky opportunity of being able to take on the role of co-pilot this October. So wherever you went, I was usually there to the point that the sale barn thought it was a paid position.
I kind of wish it was.
I enjoy getting to go to sale barns. It's not something I've done a lot before, and this fall I really got to settle in and kind of watch you in action in the sale barns, which was a lot of fun. I learned a heck ton about different cattle and temperaments and how all of that affects at the sale barn. Ranch camp's always fun. Like you said, I'm super excited about the shoot. That's what I get to teach when we do rotations during ranch camp. So not only is it going to help my ears, but I think it's also really going to take away that stress factor for future ranch camp attendees. That loud noise can be a little jarring to themselves, which then makes them a little jumpy, which then in turn stresses the cattle out more. So I think this is going to be even a level up for that experience. So very excited to get my hands on that shoot because the shoot's my favorite part of ranch camp and to see how that affects us in the long term. We talked a little bit about the rancher's daughter. You didn't really mention it, but we got a new location. Do you want to share a little bit about what that process looks like in October?
Absolutely. So the Rancher's Daughter is our farm to table retail store here in Kalispell. And we sell my family's beef in store along with other local meats and goods, but primarily it's a beef store. And that's what we created it to be. And we moved locations in October. And so we had our grand opening, which was the best day ever. And it was so reassuring to me that people had been missing our meat and people came in, and we had people who were caterers and all different kinds of people come in and say, like, we cannot buy other meat. Like, this meat is exceptional. And I feel good about that, of course, because it's my family's, but it's just such an honor because my brother, Jacob, is the one that feeds the cattle at home. And then we buy them off of the ranch live, delivered to the processor. And so I just know he puts a ton of effort in, and they're always trying to do a better job and find the right cattle to feed and feed them for the right amount of time. And so just to hear all those words of praises, he does a really exceptional job, and we're super lucky. But we are in a stunning location. We've had a ton of traffic. People really miss the meat. And so we have some really fun things planned that I'm sure we'll talk about in the November episode. But it is one of the segments that we are a part of. And so we really are like a farm to table operation. So, we have the cow calf, we have the feeders, the middle, we have stockers, we raise some commercial bulls to sell, and now we have the farm to table piece. So we really get to see every aspect of the industry. And I think that helps us raise better beef.
Yeah, it's definitely super awesome to see all the customers come in. And like you said, the location is stunning. It's right by the mountains here in Kalispell over on the east side of the valley. So beautiful location if you're ever in town. Be sure and stop by. We are taking Cattleman U around the country with our Cattleman U weekends on the road. In April, July, and November of 2025, join us for our weekends on the road. During these 3-day events, we'll be traveling across the country to dive deep into the topics that are at the forefront of cattle education. During separate dates of weekends on the road, we are going to be covering beef processing in Colorado, pasture management and grazing in Missouri, and starting your operation in Texas. You can join us for one or all. To learn more about the dates and the pricing of weekends on the road, click the link in the show notes. We can't wait to see you there. To dive into the meat of this episode is, I'm going to be blunt. What the heck have I got myself into is what we're going to go for this episode. And when I say that, we mean ranching. So people getting into it, sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming. So we want to break down some of those questions that you have about that initial barrier of entry and those things that you're thinking about, whether it's money or time, if you're looking on embarking on a ranching journey. So the first one is ranching costs how much? Let's break it down a little bit into what ranching actually costs.
Well, it costs a lot. I think that is, it's hard to quantify how much it's going to cost you, but there is a funny meme going around. The way to be a millionaire in ranching is to start with $2 million. And so, of course, I think ranching can absolutely be profitable. To give you an idea about what some like bred cattle nowadays cost, I think you could buy a bred heifer this fall for $2,500 to $3,000. So that's approximately the value of that. Now they will not have a calf to sell until next fall. So if the calf in spring of 2025, they're going to sell their first calf crop in fall of 2025. And so because of that, typically how ranches are set up is one loan payment a year. The day you get paid, then you pay off your loan. But when you think about the cost of land, of labor, of feed, of reproduction, of cattle, like all of that really adds up. The thing I want you to feel reassured about is you can be profitable. in agriculture. You can be profitable if you have to buy the land and if you have to buy the cows. You just maybe have to ranch differently than all your neighbors. And I think one of the things in agriculture that we take, or maybe we don't consider as well, is that there are a lot of family operations, or maybe the land is paid for. And I had a customer this year say to me, I don't know what I'm going to do with my calf check. And I said, oh, why? Most people have a loan payment. And they said, well, we paid off the ranch this year. And I can only imagine what that does for the next generation considering to come back when there's not a land payment. But it is very doable to have a land payment and still make it work, especially in a market like this. Now, we are going to see a turn in the market. We're going to have a cattle markets episode that you guys can listen to. So we are going to see a turn in the market, but there are a lot of costs. The one big cost that I think people miss is their labor.
Yeah. Like you said, big costs that they miss. Let's break it down into the common costs. So let's start with land because I feel like that's the one most people think about first when they're thinking about that large cost. What are some options to creatively get started with the land piece?
So of course you can lease land. I think that is a tool that's not used as much. The other thing is you can run cows on shares is what it's called, where you run your cows with someone else. They do the labor and then you get part of the check because you own the cows. And then I think there's the opportunity to kind of work off your land costs. So whether you want to run cows with someone or use their land and provide labor in exchange for that cost of the land. Of course, if you have the funds, there are some really great loans out there. USDA has some young farmer rancher loans. Every state, I believe, has some really good young farmer rancher loans. So there are some funding ways like that. But I think most people probably get started either running cows on shares or renting ground and having a lease.
The next obvious cost is cattle themselves. If you don't have cattle, I know we talked about right now is not the time really to buy cattle. Right now is the time to sell cattle. But if they're looking to get started, what are the first pieces that you want to get in your herd?
Of course, you need some really foundation females. So some females that you want to keep the calves off of every single year. If that's going to be your goal is to build this prominent herd. If you were to get started today, you could buy some late calvers that are a little bit cheaper at the sale barn, calve them out and then maybe sell them and use that money to buy something else. The other thing that I don't think a lot of people think about is if you have land or if you have a lease, running someone else's cows. And so that's a good option just to get some cash flow, especially if maybe you have 10 cows and the lease you got can run 100. Find someone with 90 or find a couple people and put cows together because everyone's always looking for grass. And if you're lucky enough to have a lease or own some, you can find some cattle to mix.
Like you said, foundational females. What do you mean by a foundational female?
Foundational females are kind of females who really have the traits and the genetics that you want to carry long term. If you're just starting your herd, it's, in my opinion, wiser to start with some that you want to keep their calves out of every year. Sometimes people buy and try to trade really quickly, but how I did it is I got one cow and I really liked her and I bought a flush sister of her. So I had two cows that were pretty much twins. They were actually born on the same day, which is so crazy. I had two different operations. And so I just started with two cows with really great genetics and still that was in 2000 and probably 6. And still today, I have genetics out of those cows. And so they just had the right look and feel for the cattle I was trying to keep around. And then every heifer calf I tried to keep if I liked her and grow my herd that way.
The next cost goes back to that shoot that we just got for the operation is infrastructure. So how do you start with infrastructure? Is it important to have a full setup or can you kind of piecemeal it until you get the setup you're dreaming of?
You got to be scrappy when you first start. And I think the more we go, the more you want it, the scrappier people get. You do not need a full setup. You need enough to keep yourself safe. So to load a trailer and unload a trailer. But other than that, there are probably people in your community willing to help. We have a young lady near us. She's a little bit younger than me. Every year when we semen test bulls, my brother calls her. She brings her bull over because she doesn't have a setup. And so she uses our setup to semen check her bulls. And so find people like that who want to help. There are portable corral systems you can get. The vets typically have chutes. So like you just got to really think outside the box, but you need good fences. If you're going to run cattle somewhere, you need a place that they can get water and mineral and feed. But other than that, the rest of the infrastructure, I think there's enough community support around you can find.
Yeah, I definitely think leaning on people around you and helping them get, if you have portable panels and they don't have that, but they have a chute, kind of working together to create that system to have a good branding or processing day works well. The last cost is labor, the sneaky one that we don't think about.
So labor, when I think about labor, you have to be paying yourself something. So I think that's one of the things where this is a much bigger conversation, but where ranches oftentimes aren't considered businesses internally because they aren't actually accounting for their time and their labor. And so your time matters and also other people's time. And so if you have to use other people's equipment or you need help gathering cattle, you're either going to have to pay them or trade them. And so I think as a young rancher, there is a lot of urgency to help them and a lot of will for the community to help. And so expect some trades, expect to show up at other people's not fun days, not just the fun branding days, gathering days, but the days where they really are shorthanded and they need some help. And I think you can work yourself into getting a lot of your labor paid for.
Our next question, now we've broken down the costs, is why do you have to wake up so early?
I love this because one of the things growing up, my dad always said is the cattle have to eat first. And so the cattle need fed first thing in the morning. But the real thing, as I become a real adult, I realized that if you don't get started early, there's not enough hours in your day with daylight, especially this time of year, just to do it right. And so getting up and kind of being ready to go as soon as you can get out there and see things, there's always going to be a running to do list on a ranch. Like it's never going to feel finished. And for a lot of people, they hate that. For people like me, I love that because there's always something to do. We can always get better. We can always be better. But you just got to get up early and kind of use the daylight to your advantage and stay out there a lot of times past dark, but just being up there. And a lot of times too, as cattle start to wake up and come to feed, you can notice the ones that aren't feeling well before they, have had a chance to eat and go lay back down. And depending on how you feed, calving can start a lot of times in the morning because they've kind of if they eat in the afternoon, then they'll sit all night and they'll start to calve in the morning. So if you absolutely hate mornings, you probably don't have to get up super early. But if you like mornings, I think you can get a lot done on a ranch before most people are even awake.
Yeah, I definitely think I'm not a morning person, so I'm not the first to be like, oh yeah, I'm up and at 'em at 4 a.m. But growing up in the Southwest, I we got up early because of the heat. So that was a huge thing. If we were going to work cattle, if we were going to brand, if we were gathering pastures, we had to be up before the heat hit, which is around noon in most places in the South. So those extra hours in the morning when you're saddling at daybreak and driving the trailer out to wherever you're going to go are important because it lowers the stress for the cattle. When it's not too hot, you can work them easier and quicker and then let them rest during that peak heat time of the day.
The nice thing about John Rose is we'll start early, but he will always drink coffee first. So we know that we at least get coffee before we have to start.
Yeah. The next question I have is, how do I understand hand signals? I think this one is funny, not only for backing up and in the cattle pens and stuff, but at the sale barn, I had quite the learning curve with the hand signals. So let's start there with the sale barn hand signals. Do you want to explain a few of them and show our video audience the ones that we're talking about?
Sure. I'll never forget. I married into a forestry family. And so sitting in the sale barn is kind of a new world for them. And my nephews were doing this sign, and their mom got mad at them. And I said, why can they not do that? And something about the devil, I don't know, we'll have to look it up, but something about it not being good. And I was like, that means 11. That means put the cattle in my pen 11. And so it was one of those moments where I realized that we have hand signals that other people don't. And I didn't know they had dual meanings. So in the sale barn, it's pretty typical, like 1 through 5. You just use your fingers. 6 is a thumbs up. So it looks like a 6 to the auctioneer. 7, I have very short fingers. So 7's kind of hard for me, but this is a 7. An 8 is where you, what's this called?
Cross your fingers.
Cross your fingers. That's an 8. A 9 is like thumbs down, but it looks like a 9 to the auctioneer. 10, you can flash 10. 11 looks like this. You do a lot of X's. So you'll put something on your X's. A hand signal I use is kind of a circle when I want them to pen them together. So for example, yesterday at the sale barn, 2 days ago at the sale barn, I had ones which were my 1,000-pound steers, but I had a bull. So I did a 1X. And then the next one that came in was 1,000 pound steer. So I did one, and then I told them to pen them together with my 1Xs. So the goal of all the hand signals is to do it with one hand because you have your buyer's card in the other or your cell phone and you're talking to someone. But we do a lot of hand signals. This one is really common. So a lot of times auctioneers will get going and they'll be asking for 220 and you want to do 219 and a half. So you'll cut the bid in half. And then sometimes they'll be going up by 5. So they'll say 220, asking 225, and I want to pay 221. So I'll hold up a 1, get them to bump back down and do a 1. The other is stop. You have to tell them that if they're doing something wrong or there's a calf you want out. And then a lot of times we like use our body. I don't know, that probably doesn't sound right, but if one has short ears, you're going to be trying to signal to the auctioneer that there's one that has short ears, you want it taken out. Or sometimes you'll, be pointing at an eye, things like that. But just a lot of hand signals, because especially me, they can't hear my voice very well. So I have to really, really yell. And they're auctioneering, so you have to be louder than them in order. So there's a ton of hand signals. It took me a while to notice also. It seems as if every buyer's hand signals are a little different. So I can only imagine what the auctioneer feels like as we're all just pointing and trying to signal to him what to do.
Yeah, that is one thing that I've seen too. Is I'm like, I don't even know what that signal is. You've never done that. What does that mean when we're watching other people? But I think an interesting piece that you said there was you have to be able to stop. So that was one thing you said to me first. So your dad was like, before you can buy cattle, you have to be comfortable stopping the sale and saying they messed up. And I think that's probably good advice for most people that are going to sit in a sale barn for the first time, especially if you're buying your herd one by one. You want to make sure you're getting the right things for what you think you're getting them.
Yeah, I had to do that this week actually. They had a big group of heiferettes in the barn, and I've been buying a lot of heiferettes to go to Oklahoma to rebreed. And one had a lump. And so I had to stop the sale, ask them to take out that lump, and then they just waited. And so my dad was like, "What's happening?" Because I was on the phone with him, and I was like, "Well, I disrupted progress." And so I said, "I got to take a lump one out before they could bring them back, get all the accurate weights, and we could roll again."
What's a heiferette?
Heiferette is a cow that has had at least one calf, sometimes 2. So she's 2 or 3 years old and did not rebreed. Instead of calling her an open cow, they call her a heiferette.
Perfect. Next, I have how to manage time between family, house chores, relationships, and the ranch. This is a big one.
What a question. I don't know. Okay, seasonality really matters. There are busier times on the ranch than not. One of the things that I think is really, really important is being productive and being like really determined and specific about what you have to get done and what you can get done. And then I love the book about stacking habits, Atomic Habits. We can link that for you guys, but it talks about how to do things like together that really make sense. So while your coffee's warming up in the morning, you can unload the dishwasher, for example. Just stacking some of these habits and making sure it, really works with the systems. So I think that's important. The other thing too is you got to prioritize spending time with people. One of the things that I see a lot of is ranchers saying, "Sorry, the cows come first," or "Sorry, I got to do that. I can't attend," especially when it comes to kids. And my dad was really good about saying like, "Well, if I can get it all done, I'll be there." And 9 times out of 10, he was there. And so I think sometimes we keep ourselves busy, so we're not super productive. And then we miss out on opportunities because, of course, the cows needed something. And of course, the cows will always need something. But just making sure that you're prioritizing family when needed and you're getting stuff done, and then you know when to quit and try again tomorrow. But there's seasons. You'll spend a lot more time together probably in the winter when it's cold and you're inside. There's seasons of hustle, there's seasons of rest. So you got to figure out the seasons. You got to figure out how your brain works. I'm a to-do list girl. Figure out how to do it for yourself, and then just know that like sometimes the house is going to look a little rough, or sometimes the floor is going to be really dirty because every single guy who comes in takes his shoes off and they're wet and they're going to, have mud everywhere. And you just got to be okay with that. You got to know your priorities. The other thing too is outsourcing. I don't think ranchers do this nearly enough. And I think we think, well, we're rural, so there's not the resources, but your neighbor might have someone, home, a child or a spouse who wants to earn a little extra money. You can trade. house cleaning for some meals. I mean, there's a ton. The world really in agriculture for outsourcing is an oyster. Like we have not even dove into that really at all.
Yeah, I think you use the word outsourcing, other people use the word favor and stuff like that. So like you said, switching meals for cleaning, doing like your strength for somebody else's strength, going back to like the trading and bartering that we did back in the day. I think ag still relies on that as a foundational principle in the community to help each other out. Another important thing to help with that time management piece is take the kids with you. If you can, like if it's going to check the cattle, like making it a family, like a date night if you don't have kids yet, including those special moments in the tasks, I see really helps people around us.
Yeah, and just being super honest too about the time. Like, I'm married and I just tell my husband in the fall I gotta hustle. Like I gotta be on the road. I mean, you guys heard almost 6,000 miles in a little over 30 days. I mean, that is a lot. And I had a friend come to town.
Mhm.
So I was spending time with them and we had ranch camp. And so, but I'm just really clear and honest. Like this is when I'm gonna be gone. This is when I'm gonna be on the road. And here's the support I need. And luckily I have a husband who's good at that. But it comes with communication. He
Mhm.
knows really when he has to step up because I'm gonna be gone or busy. And I think the same thing can happen at ranches.
Yeah, exactly. Next question is kind of on this time thought is how do I get over not being able to take a vacation ever again?
Well, I think that's false. I think you can't take a vacation. I think ranchers like to say they can't take a vacation, um, or they try to say that a conference and educational situation is their vacation.
Mhm.
But you just have to be really intentional, have good people around you, and make it work because time away is really important. Whether it's an Airbnb in the next town and you just have a long weekend, or whether you're going to go somewhere warm. I know we went to Hawaii as a family in January of 24, and even my brother, who never really likes to go anywhere besides like day trips, he said, "Wow, I'm enjoying the warm weather, things like that." And I think like it helped the spirit of everything. And we had someone come and help on the operation. And also, my dad said, like, we're away, so we can't control what happens. Like, we did our very best. It's not going to be life changing damages, and so we have to enjoy ourselves while we're here. But it was really great. We had four generations there. So my grandma to my niece and nephew. And then just lots of family. We got to enjoy about a week in Hawaii. And it was a big push to get us all there, but it was something that we really enjoyed and cherished all being there together. And I think it's important to prioritize that. And so, as ranchers, I think you can take vacation. You have to be good at time management. You have to have good support around you, and you have to have good systems and processes, but it's not completely off the table.
And I think people like to make those impossible things to accomplish. Like, I'll never have the perfect hired hand or I'll never have the perfect support, but it can usually be enough. Even my family would take vacations occasionally on our ranch. So I think just prioritizing that time away is important for the family really helps you get into perspective.
Yeah, especially if you have a spouse who didn't grow up in the industry.
Mhm.
It's kind of crazy for them to think about, hey, I have to be here working 7 days a week for 365 days. And that is a really easy way to ruin a relationship or ruin a relationship with kids. And so, again, it doesn't have to be this grand adventure where you fly somewhere crazy. Like, I remember one of my favorite, things growing up was my dad would go to those conferences, but then we'd stay extra.
Mhm.
So we'd stay a couple days after. We always got a hotel with a pool and we do fun things in the town that we were going. And so my dad was like, I'm already here for work, but
Mhm.
I'm going to make this enjoyable for my kids as well. And so we loved that.
Conferences are fun.
Yeah.
The next question is why do people often assume that women have to be married into ag?
It's a really good question too. I don't know. We think it's a man's world.
Mhm.
And so it's easier to think that the rancher is a male. But I would say the statistics now are tipping to where females play a much larger role, if not a majority role, in a lot of operations. And so you don't actually, one, you don't have to marry into it at all. You don't have to marry into agriculture. You can be first generation and get started. And two, um, you don't have to marry a man with land. You can be a woman who owns operation and marries in. I always tease my husband because again, he came from a forestry family and we're a ranching family. And I was the one with cows when we got married. I always tell him that he inherited them when he got married to me. But it is a culture shift. And so you have to be prepared for that. And you have to know that no matter what side of the coin you're on, if you're going to bring someone into the industry, you are going to have to be really great at communicating because it does look a little different. And if you and your spouse have the desire to be in the industry, absolutely be a first generation. We need more first generations who come on who don't have family operations and who get started.
And I think as women and a woman who's not married yet, like you feel like a man has to be the tie to ag, or that's kind of what's been told to you. You can be your own tie to the ag industry. Like you can be the person that is the first generation in your family. And I think that's important for young women and myself even to hear is that it doesn't have to be somebody else that makes you grounded in the industry.
I think the reason we think that is because when we view agriculture, we view like strength. Like you
Mhm.
have to be physically, strong to do all those things. And sure, there are probably some things that just naturally as women are much harder to do without equipment. But there is probably a man in your small town who's willing to come out and do the heavy lifting to help you, or someone at church or someone like that. So don't have that be your barrier to entry to be like, I'm not physically strong enough. You can do it, and there are ways around it.
We are so excited to bring you our fall Cattleman U store. We have worked with different artists, custom makers, and more to bring you a variety of fall ranch items. Whether you are currently living and working on a cattle operation or still dreaming about the long days riding in the pasture, our fall store items are for you. Enjoy the fall weather cozied up in your Cattleman U crew neck, custom brand wild rag, and burning your new favorite candle. In store, you will find all of this and more. We're now offering crew necks, t-shirts, hats, wild rags, mugs, custom coffee, custom scented candles, and matchboxes. Shop all of this at cattlemanululive.com/store. Thanks for answering all the questions today. For our YouTube guests watching the video podcast, I have 3 more questions for you. So the first is when looking at leases, what does AUM mean and why is it an important factor?
Absolutely. So AUM means animal units per month. And so it just gives you an idea about what the expected capacity is of that and also the cost of the lease.
What is the standard right now for those AUMs?
Well, varies dramatically because what happens in Florida is not going to be the same as Montana. But in Montana, a yearling is like either 0.6, 0.7, 0.75, something like that. A cow calf is usually 1.5 and a bull is usually 2.
Perfect. Next is kind of a hard question, and you may not have a great answer for it, but what do taxes look like for a rancher?
So you're going to file self-employment taxes, unless you have put the ranch in an S corp or an LLC where it's paying you. But most likely you're going to file those. You do have special forms. I don't know the exact name, but there are agriculture forms out there. So make sure your accountant knows that you have agriculture. You get to kind of depreciate the cost of equipment and land and animals and all of that. The one thing that is a little bit different is typically there's not a payroll for yourself. And so that can be a tax strategy. If you are self-employed, you can invest in a self IRA, which is called a SEP. And you can put a ton of money. I think it's like, we'll look it up, but 75,000 a year, something like that, as long as you don't have employees. So that can be a strategy. Most of the time, you won't be getting a refund because you aren't paying in taxes. And so I think that a lot of times we think about, okay, if the operation loses money, then I get a refund. But if you don't have taxes going, if you're not paying taxes, you can't get a refund. Also, you should have an operation that shows profitable. I think it's every 4 years it has to show profitable. Otherwise, it's a hobby. And you can roll your loss over from year to year. And so just a lot of different options like that. You want to have a good accountant no matter what. You want to be keeping track of expenses, what's personal and what's ranch expenses, just because that will really help with the profitability.
What strategy advice do you have for keeping track of those expenses?
No strategy. I'm really bad at this. Ask my team. I actually just love an Excel sheet. And one of the things that's easy for me is at the end of every month, I still do this 10 years into business now, is I just go through each statement and write down what it was for, a little note, so that I can send that to the accountant. So there are a lot less questions. For me, it's pretty typical. It's about fuel twice a day. And so because of that, I have to explain that quite a bit actually on my taxes as to why there's fuel in 2 different states in the same day. But just writing little notes down will be really helpful. Some people use a credit card. All that's kind of, internal strategy that you want, but just making sure I don't keep receipts. We have a lot of digital things now, so I'm not huge on keeping receipts. But I know 10 years ago, people used to have shoe boxes of receipts that they turn into their poor accountant. I think we can do a lot more digitally these days.
I could not imagine being the accountant having to sort through rancher receipts that have been in pockets and have who knows what on them. The last question for today's episode is, what is your personal time management strategy and how does it flex during different seasons?
It really has to flex during different seasons. I'm a pretty highly productive person. Just naturally, I like to get a lot done. I always have a running to-do list. So that's something that's really easy for me is no matter what, I can say, well, I have 15 minutes. Can I check something off the list? The other thing that I try to do is be really intentional with my time, especially during busy seasons. And so when can I turn the computer off? When can I stop answering the phone? When can I kind of put some of those boundaries on? The other thing that's just super personal is I'm more productive in the morning. So if I have to choose between driving in the morning or driving at night, I almost always drive at night and then I can work in the morning. So just finding when you're the most productive and figuring out how to do that. And then I have to write things down or I will never remember. And then someone will bring it up 6 weeks later and I'm like, oh, totally never thought about that twice. So making sure that you have a good way of keeping yourself accountable. The other thing too is I have a running list of phone calls. So these are customers to call back. These are family to call. I'm super blessed that I still have both the grandparents on my dad's side who are in their late 80s and 90s, and I talk to them once a week. So when I'm on the road, one, I don't really listen to music. I listen to a podcast or an audiobook, or I'm talking on the phone, or I'm thinking. I do a lot of thinking and brainstorming while that, but I just try to use that driving time to feel productive. And so if I can make it educational, I'll do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think filling those hours that are kind of those lost hours, the driving time in the shower, those kind of times when you can't be doing other things but the task at hand, it's important to use them for either education or if that is your downtime. I personally like to listen to music during those times, and when I'm co-pilot, eventually I'm turn off the podcast and I say we have to listen to something fun for a little bit. So I think it's important to know those boundaries too, of like those downtimes can be fun still too, and letting those strategies change.
Okay, that's all. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Cattleman U podcast. Be sure to submit your questions down below at the link to have your questions answered in a future episode. Please like and subscribe to our channel. When looking at land to lease, what does CPU mean and why is that an important factor when you're looking? Isn't it CPU? What's the letters?
AUM.
AUM. LOL. Hang on.
I was like, shit.
I was thinking about it. That's a computer term. LOL. AUM.
Yeah.
Animal units per.
I was like, cut.
Take it back.
I've never.
AUM.
Yeah.
What, animal units per
month.
Ah, I didn't even know the M part. Okay, start over. That's so funny. You're like, I don't know. What is CP? Oh, it's processing for computers. That's the central processing unit.
Yeah, great.
It's an important thing. You should know that when you're looking at your lease. Next.